My name is Willa Myers, and I am 34 years old. On the second Friday in October, my mother slid a leather folder across a steakhouse table and told 22 people I was the one with the job. Inside that folder was my sister's rehearsal dinner. $9,400 of wine. A balance of $13,149.75. Every fork in the room stopped moving. My family watched me pick it up, and my mother smiled at me the way she smiles at waiters. So I smiled back. I stood up. I carried that folder up the stairs and asked the girl at the host stand a very ordinary question. What I found in that reservation system was worse than the bill, and what I did about it, an hour later, is the reason my mother has not spoken to me since. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge. This is the channel where quiet women keep their receipts, hold their line, and walk out with their names intact. If a story here ever sounds like something from your own kitchen table, that is not a coincidence. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I should tell you what I do, because it matters later. I own a small tax and bookkeeping office in Hilliard, Ohio, on the second floor above a laundromat called Sudsy's. 3 employees. My name is on the glass in gold vinyl, and I paid a man $90 to put it there the spring I turned 28. I got my license the hard way. Night classes, 4 exams in 11 months, a folding table in a studio apartment. People bring me their shoeboxes, and I turn them into sentences. That is the whole job. A woman comes in crying about a letter from the state, and by Thursday, the letter is a line item, and the line item has a plan. I am good at it. I am so good at it that I have never once shown anyone my own books. Not my accountant friend. Not the man I dated for 2 years. Nobody. There is a certain kind of person who becomes the one everybody calls, and that person learns very early that being needed is easier than being known. That was me at 22, and it was still me at 34, sitting in a basement dining room in a blue dress. Since I was 22, every time the Myers family opened a hole, I filled it. Car transmissions, a furnace, 2 funerals, a cousin's community college semester that nobody ever mentioned again. I never sent an invoice. I never asked for a thank you note. But I am a bookkeeper, and bookkeepers cannot help themselves. So somewhere in a spreadsheet I do not open very often, there is a running total of what I have given my family since the year I turned 22. I know that number to the dollar. I have never said it out loud to a single human being. Before 11 o'clock that Friday night, I said it to the one person I had spent 12 years not saying it to. My mother called me in July. She did not invite me to anything. She announced it. We booked Halverson's, she said. The cellar room. Cass is going to cry when she sees it. Halverson's is the chop house on Bellefonte Street downtown, the one with the brick vault ceiling and the wine list bound in leather. People get engaged there. People do not book the cellar room on a dental hygienist's salary. So I asked the only question I know how to ask. What's the budget, Mom? She told me about the linens. I asked again. She told me about the parking validation. I asked a third time and she laughed and said, Willa, honey, don't be that person. That is her whole method. Right there. And I want you to see it clearly, because she never once in her life asked me for money. Not once. She just arranged the world so that the money had nowhere else to come from, and then she called it family. I did not let it go. I want that on the record. That same night, I texted my sister and I said I would cover the flowers and the cake, and I gave her a ceiling, $1,200, because a number you say out loud is a fence, and a number you leave blank is a field. Cassidy wrote back, "Okay, Ty," with a little heart. That was the entire negotiation. So when people ask me later why I did not see it coming, I tell them the truth. I set a limit in July. I set it in writing. On a phone, with a dollar figure attached. Remember that I set a limit, because nobody else in my family did. And because 3 months later a woman I had never met would ask me, very politely, whether I had ever authorized anything at all. I got to Halverson's at 6:30. The cellar room is down 39 oak stairs, and I counted them going down, because I count things when I am nervous and I have stopped apologizing for it. At the bottom, the air changes. It goes cool and dry and smells like butter and old brick. The ceiling is a low vault with 12 filament bulbs strung along it, and the whole room holds exactly one table, long enough to seat 22, dressed in cloth so heavy it hangs like a curtain. There was a menu on a wooden easel by the door. Prefix, $95 a head. I did the arithmetic before I took my coat off, because that is what my brain does with a number on an easel. 22 guests at $95 is $2,090 in food, and $2,090 was already more than my family had ever spent on anything that was not a car. The wine list sat at the head of the table in a leather binder as thick as a hymnal. Nobody touched it. My Aunt Lorna was already telling the story of how she found the venue, which was not true, and my stepfather Ray was standing by the wall the way he stands at every event, holding a beer he was not drinking. Cassidy looked beautiful and terrified. My mother had on the green dress she saves. I walked the length of that table reading place cards, because I wanted to know who I was sitting next to. Fisk, Dowell, Kessler, Bratton. 2 prices. A name I did not recognize at all. I got all the way to the far end, and I turned around and I walked it again slower. My name was not on that table anywhere. I found it on the second pass. There was a 23rd chair at the north end, pushed in against the corner where the kitchen door swings. It did not match the other 22. The others were upholstered in that dark green the restaurant uses everywhere. Mine was a banquet chair, black, the kind you stack. Somebody had carried it down 39 stairs for me. On the plate in front of it was a place card in the same slanted event planner handwriting as all the others, and it did not say Willa. It said, in brown ink, W. Myers, Act. I stood there with my coat still over my arm and read it twice. The kitchen door opened and hit the back of the chair, and a young man came through with a tray, and he said sorry, and the door swung back and hit the chair again. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think a lot of people expect rage, and rage is not what happens. What happens is that your ears get warm and your mouth goes very dry, and you become extremely aware of your own hands. I thought about the drive over. 22 minutes from my condo in Hilliard, and somewhere around minute 9, I had decided that tonight was Cassidy's night, and that nothing at all was going to be about me. So I put my coat on the back of the black chair. I sat down where they put me. I turned the place card face down under the edge of my bread plate so I would not have to look at it, and I made small talk with a groomsman named Doug about the Buckeyes for 11 minutes. I read that card as accountant. For the next 4 hours, that is what I thought it meant. The wine started at 7:05. The sommelier was a lean man in his 40s named Peter, and my mother called him sweetheart before he finished introducing himself. That is a gift she has. Servers love her. She is warm the way a fireplace is warm, and she can make a stranger feel chosen in about 9 seconds. She opened the leather binder and did not put on her reading glasses, which meant she had already decided what she was ordering. "We'll start with the Barolo," she said. 6 of them. Peter said, "Very good." And he did not blink. 6 bottles at $340 apiece, $2,040, before anyone had touched a piece of bread. Down at my end, I heard Lorna say the word celebration twice. Somebody clapped. My mother stood up with her hand on the back of Cassidy's chair and said, "It's once in a lifetime." And the table made that warm noise a table makes. I looked at my sister. My sister looked at the tablecloth. She was 27 years old and she was getting married in about 20 hours and she was studying the weave of a tablecloth. That should have told me everything. I turned to watch Peter walk out, because I was waiting for the part that always comes, the part where the server catches somebody's eye and asks quietly how the check is being handled. In 14 years of eating in restaurants with my mother, I have watched that little transaction happen every single time. Peter did not do it. He wrote on his pad, he nodded once at my mother, and he went up the stairs. He never asked who was paying. Later that night, I found out why, and the answer was sitting in a computer at the top of those stairs, 4 months old. By 7:48, the Barolo was gone and the second order was down. 4 bottles of a Napa Cabernet at $610 each, and 2 bottles of champagne at $290. I did not have to look at the list. I heard the prices because Peter repeated them back, the way good sommeliers do, in that neutral voice that gives the host one last chance to flinch. My mother did not flinch. She said, "Perfect." And she touched his forearm. In my head, the column was building itself. 2,040, 2,440, 580, $5,060 of wine at 7:48, with the entrees not yet out. I have sat across from small business owners who cried in my office over $4,000. I know exactly what that number weighs. So I took out my phone under the edge of the tablecloth and I texted my sister, 4 seats down and across. Who is paying for the wine? No question mark, because I did not want it to look like a conversation. I watched her. She picked up her phone. She read it. Her thumb did not move. Then she locked the screen and turned the phone face down on the linen and put her hand flat on top of it, the way you hold down a napkin in wind. And she leaned over and laughed at something Trent's father said. My sister read that message at 7:51 on a Friday night in October. She never answered it. Not that night, not that weekend, not in the 9 months since. I sat with my back to a swinging door and watched her hold her phone down against a tablecloth, and something in my chest went very quiet and very organized, which is the way I get right before I do arithmetic that hurts. At 8:12, Peter came back down carrying a wicker cradle with 2 bottles laid in it like sleeping infants. He carried them with both hands. He set the cradle on a side table and got a candle and a decanter, and the whole room turned to watch. Because that is theater, and it works. Bordeaux. 2009. My mother had ordered them while I was in the restroom. I leaned forward to catch Peter's eye, and I was going to say something small and reasonable, something like, "Excuse me, before you open those, could I have a word with whoever is handling the check?" That is all. 6 seconds of my life. That is the entire intervention I was planning, and my stepfather put his hand on my wrist. Ray Kessler is 66 years old. He installed heating systems for 30 years, and his hands are enormous and warm and dry. And in 11 years of marriage to my mother, he has never once raised his voice at anybody. 3 fingers on my wrist. Very light. He did not grab me. He just rested his hand there the way you rest a hand on a dog that is about to bark. And he said low, without turning his head, "Let it go, kiddo. Just tonight." I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the decanter. That is the detail I could not put down for months afterward, and it is the reason I am telling you about a wrist instead of about a wine. He did not look at me. Peter uncorked the first bottle and the room made a sound like a small happy animal, and I sat back in my black chair against the kitchen door with my hands in my lap. Those 2 bottles were $2,170 each. Dessert came out at 9:14, a lemon tart with a candle in it that nobody had asked for. My mother stood up and tapped her ring against her glass. She thanked everybody for coming out for her daughter. She said the word, "blessed." She told a story about Cassidy at 6 years old marrying the neighbor's beagle in the driveway, and it is a good story, and she tells it well. And the whole table laughed in the right place. Then she sat down. Peter came around the far side with the leather folder in both hands, and he set it down beside her elbow, and he stepped back exactly 1 step, which is what they train them to do. My mother did not open it. She put 2 fingers on the corner of it and she slid it across the table. It went over a linen runner and past the salt and across 3 folded napkins, and it came to a stop directly in front of me, square, like she had practiced. Everybody watched it travel. It is a large table and it took a while. I opened it, and because I am who I am, I read it from the bottom up. Total. $14,649.75. Above that, a 20% service charge on a party of 22, $2,298. Above that, Ohio sales tax, $861.75. Above that, food, $2,090, exactly as I had calculated it standing at the door with my coat on. And above that, on one line, in the same ordinary font as everything else, wine, $9,400 and no cents. I read all of it, and my hands were steady. Then I saw the last line, the one under the total, and my hands were not steady anymore. Deposit applied, it said. Minus $1,500. Balance due, $13,149.75. Nobody had ever told me anything about a deposit. I did not raise my voice. I want that understood. Because of what people said afterward. I looked up at my mother across 9 feet of tablecloth, and I asked her, in the tone you use to ask someone to pass the butter, "Mom, what is this?" And my mother, who is warm the way a fireplace is warm, did not lower her voice at all. She let it carry the whole length of that room, over the candles and the dessert plates, and my sister's veil sample folded on the chair beside her. "You're the one with the job." Nobody said anything, 22 people, and a swinging door behind me, and for about 4 seconds the only sound in the cellar room was the ice settling in a bucket. Somebody down by the dowels laughed once and then stopped, the way you do when you realize you have misread a room. My Aunt Lorna filled the silence, because Lorna cannot survive a silence. "She's always been so good with money," Lorna said. To nobody. Brightly. Trent looked at his father. Glenn Dowell looked at his napkin and folded it in half and set it beside his plate. Cassidy did not look at me. Ray drank his beer for the first time all night. My ears went hot. I counted my breath in for 4 and out for 4, which is a thing I learned to do in March of my second tax season, when a man screamed at me about a penalty that was his fault. And here is the part I am least proud of, so I am going to say it first and get it over with. My first instinct was not anger. My first instinct was not even shock. My first instinct, sitting in a stacking chair against a kitchen door with my family watching, was to reach for my purse. I did not reach for my purse. What I did instead is what I always do, which is reconcile. When other people panic, they get loud, or they cry, or they leave. I start matching numbers to other numbers until the shape of the thing shows up. So I sat there with the folder open, and I ran the night. Food, 2,090, which meant the head count was locked at 22, which meant somebody had confirmed 22 covers with this restaurant in advance. Deposit, 1,500, applied. Applied means charged. Charged means a card. And then a very old number came up out of the floor of my memory and stood in front of me. $312.44. That is a hotel in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. 2.5 years ago, in March, I took my mother and Ray and Cassidy to Gatlinburg for 4 nights, because Ray had just had his shoulder done, and my mother had been saying for a year that she had never seen the mountains. I paid for the cabin with my business card, $2,180, and I handed the card to a young woman at a rental desk with my mother standing beside me talking about the hot tub. 3 weeks after we got home, a charge showed up on that account for $312.44. An extra night, a different property, after we had already driven home. I called my mother. She said, "Oh honey, I'll square that up with you." I said okay. It was the second week of March and I had 41 returns on my desk, and I coded it to travel, and I moved on. I did not forget that charge. I filed it. There is a difference between forgetting something and filing it. And the difference cost me exactly $1,500 a few hours later. Everybody at that table thought the question was who pays tonight. I had just understood that the question was 2.5 years old. So I closed the folder. I did not push it back across the table, which is what she expected, and what would have started a scene. I did not sign it either. I picked it up and I tucked it under my arm like a clipboard, and I stood up, and my chair scraped against the brick because a stacking chair does that. 22 faces came up at once. "Excuse me a minute," I said. "Cass, the cake is beautiful." My mother said my name. Just the name. The way she uses it. Like a hand flat on a door. "Willa," I said. "I'll be right back." And I went out past the kitchen door and up the stairs. 39 of them. I counted them going up too, the way I had counted them coming down. And I remember thinking that this was probably the last time I would ever be inside this building, which turned out to be true. At the top, the noise changes. You come out of that cool brick basement into a warm, loud dining room full of Friday night, 90 people eating steak, a bartender shaking something, a hostess laughing at a man's joke. Nobody up there knew anything. That is the strangest part of that whole evening, and it is the part I still think about. My entire life turned over in a basement, and 40 feet away a table of four was arguing about the Reds. If you have ever carried a bill up a staircase while a room full of people watched you go, you already know exactly what my hands felt like on that banister. Tell me in the comments what you would have done at the top of those stairs. And if you want to know what I found there, stay with me and subscribe, because it was not what anybody at that table expected, including me. I walked to the host stand. I put the folder down on the walnut, and I asked a question. The host stand at Halverson's is a slab of walnut with a little brass lamp on it and an iPad in a black stand. The girl behind it was maybe 23. Dark hair, glasses, a name tag that said Bree. She had that end-of-shift brightness that costs a person something to produce. I have a voice I use for the IRS. It is not cold and it is not sweet. It is the voice of a person who has already decided to be reasonable for as long as it takes, and it makes people tell you things. "Hi," I said. "I'm with the party in the cellar room. May I see the reservation details, please?" She smiled and said, "Of course." She turned the iPad toward herself and typed. And then she stopped typing. I watched her eyes go left to right across a line, and then go back and do it again, which is what people do when a screen says something that does not match the person standing in front of them. She looked up. She said, "Are you Willa?" I said that I was. She looked back down at the screen and she did a thing that I have thought about 100 times since. She turned the iPad about 30 degrees toward me, enough that I caught the top of a field and a name in capital letters, and then she turned it right back, like she had remembered a rule. Her ears went red. "I'm sorry," she said. "I think I should get my manager." And she was gone before I could answer. Out around the bar, walking fast in the way that young people walk when they are trying not to look like they are hurrying. I stood at that host stand alone with a leather folder and a brass lamp for 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, you can think of a lot of explanations. I thought of 6. Not one of them was correct. While I waited, I went back down. Not to sit. There was something down there I wanted in my pocket. Coming down those stairs the second time was different because now the room saw me before I saw it. Conversation dipped. My mother's chin came up. Lorna stopped mid-sentence with her hand in the air. I did not go to my seat. I walked the long side of the table, past all of them, all the way to the north end where the black stacking chair sat crooked against the wall with my coat on it. I lifted the bread plate. I picked up the place card, the one in brown ink that said W. Myers. Act. I folded it in half along the crease of my thumb, and I put it in the pocket of my coat. And I put the coat over my arm. The whole room watched me do it. It took maybe 8 seconds, and it was the loudest thing I did all night. "What are you doing?" my mother said. She said it the way you speak to a child in church. I straightened up, and I looked at her down the length of 22 chairs, and I told her the truth, in the plainest language my profession has. Bookkeeping. Then I walked back out past the kitchen door and went up the stairs again. 39. My Aunt Lorna said something behind me that I could not hear, and my sister said, "Mom," in a small voice, and the door swung shut. That folded card stayed in my coat pocket for the rest of the night. I put my fingers on it 4 separate times before I got in my car, and each of the 4 times I did it for a different reason, and I am going to tell you about every one of them. The first time was in a hallway, 20 minutes later, while my mother offered me a deal. The manager was already at the host stand when I came up. She was in her early 40s, black vest, hair pulled back, a click pen in her breast pocket, and reading glasses pushed up on her head. Her name tag said M. Salas. She did not do the thing that restaurant managers do, that lean in, that soft, apologetic face. She looked at me the way a nurse looks at a chart. "Ms. Myers, I'm Margot Salas, I'm the general manager." I said hello. She said, "I'd rather have this conversation in my office than at the host stand." And she said it in a way that was not a suggestion, and I understood immediately that this woman was not on my side. She was not against me either. She was standing exactly where a professional stands, which is on the side of her own building. I have been that person in a small room with somebody's bad news, and I recognized her the way you recognize an accent from your own town. Her office is behind the bar, down a short hall, past the ice machine. One desk, two chairs, a monitor on a swing arm, a filing cabinet, a wall clock above the cabinet, and that smell all restaurant offices have: thermal paper and coffee and floor cleaner. She shut the door, and the noise of the dining room dropped away to almost nothing. She did not sit down first, and she did not offer me water. "Ms. Myers, I'm going to be direct with you because we're closing out in about an hour." She woke up the monitor. "I have an open pre-authorization on the cellar room party for $13,149.75. Before my staff closes that ticket, I need to know that it's good." And then she turned the monitor toward me. "I have looked at 10,000 screens in my life: balance sheets, transcripts, portals, 3-year comparisons with a variance column. I know how to read a form fast, and I know how to keep my face flat while I do it. This one took me apart in the time it takes to read a grocery list. Party size, 22. Room, cellar. Date, October 9th, 7 o'clock. And then the guest block, at the top, in caps. Guest name, Myers Willa. Phone, a number with a Columbus area code that I did not recognize. Not my cell, not my office, not my mother's house line. Email, a Gmail address made of my first name, my last name, and 4 digits, and I have never in my life had a Gmail address. And underneath all of it, in a little gray field with a lock icon beside it, the line that ended my family. Card on file, Visa, ending 4419. Here is what I need you to understand, and it is the part everybody misses when I tell this story. It was not the fact that my mother had used a card of mine. That would have been ugly and small and survivable. 4419 is not my personal Visa. My personal Visa ends in 0362, and it has my grocery store on it, and my gym, and a subscription to a knitting podcast I do not listen to anymore. 4419 is the business card for Myers Tax and Bookkeeping. That card has my e-filing platform on it. It has my software licenses, my professional liability premium, and the payroll service that pays 3 people who are not me. My mother had not reached into my purse. She had reached into my company. And Margot Salas, who did not know any of that, sat down across the desk from me, folded her hands, and waited. I asked her for a minute. She gave me one, which was generous, and she used it to write something on a pad. I sat in that chair and I inventoried the card the way you inventory a house after a break-in. The e-file platform renewal, $6,840 on automatic payment, scheduled to run at 6 in the morning on Monday. 41 extended returns due to the IRS on the 15th. Without that platform, I cannot transmit a single one of them. My payroll service pulls on the 28th. My liability premium renews in January. Nadine Brody has worked for me for 6 years. She is 52. She put a daughter through Ohio State on what I pay her, and her quarterly bonus comes out of the same account that renewal comes out of. So this was no longer $13,000 of my money, which I have, which would have hurt for a year and then stopped hurting. This was a live wire running through 3 other people's lives, and my mother had wrapped her hand around it in June and had not mentioned it at a single Sunday dinner since. I took out my phone and I texted Nadine. "Do not run anything on the business card until I call you." Nadine wrote back in 40 seconds. "Everything okay?" I sat there and looked at that question and I could not answer it. Not because I was too upset, because I did not yet know what the true answer was going to be, and Nadine has never once in 6 years gotten a lie from me. I put the phone face down on my knee, which is exactly what my sister had done at 7:51, and I want you to know I noticed that. There was a version of that Friday night where I paid $13,000, drove home to Hilliard, and nobody ever found out. I need you to understand how close I came to picking it. Margot Salas gave me my minute, and then she took the monitor back and scrolled up. "I want to show you this record," she said, because I think you're about to ask me for it anyway. She was right. She dragged the window and a log came up, the kind of audit trail every decent system keeps, with a timestamp on every line. Booking created. June 12th, 3:41 in the afternoon. Deposit authorized. June 12th, 3:44. $1,500. On the visa ending 4419. 3 minutes between the booking and the money. I sat there and did the thing you should never do, which is place yourself in your own life on a specific afternoon. June 12th was a Thursday. At 3:41 on that Thursday, I was in a conference room at a bakery on Tribune Road with a client named Roseanne, going through a year of point-of-sale reports she had printed out at home on an inkjet because she did not trust the cloud. I remember her hands. I remember the smell of the proofing room. That is what I was doing at the exact minute my mother read my company's card number into a telephone. This was not a woman getting swept up at a dinner table. This was 4 months old. It had a Thursday in it. Margot watched me get there. She let me get there by myself, which I did not appreciate until later. Then she asked the question in the flattest voice a person can use. "Ms. Myers, did you make this booking?" And I said, "No." She uncapped the click pen, and she wrote something down on her pad, and she did not say anything else. That was the first time in my adult life that somebody wrote down something I said. I stepped out into the hall to breathe, and Ray was standing by the ice machine with his coat already on. Not draped over his arm. On, zipped, like a man waiting on a bus. Ray does not come find people. In 11 years I have never once seen him seek out a conversation. "You okay, kiddo?" he said, and it was not really a question. I did not have any room left in me for warm-up. "Ray, did you know about a deposit in June?" He looked at the ice machine. He is a very large man and he made himself smaller against that wall, and he took his time, and I let him. 4 seconds is a long time in a hallway. "She said she'd handle it," he said. "That's not what I asked you." He nodded slowly, twice, the way he nods at a furnace that is not going to be fixed. "Yeah," he said. "I knew." And then Ray Kessler, who has never raised his voice at anyone, who calls me kiddo, who drove 3 hours in February to help me move a desk, said the thing that took the floor out from under me. "You're the one with the job, kiddo. I figured it'd be fine." That is when I understood what I was actually standing in. I had spent the last hour building a case against my mother in my head. One woman, one bad decision, something with edges I could cut out. But it was not one woman. It was a habit the whole family had, and the kindest man in it had been carrying his share of it in silence since June, in a zipped coat, by an ice machine, waiting to go home. I went back down because I wanted to look my sister in the face and ask her one question. The room had broken into pieces by then. People were standing. Cassidy was crying in the corner with 2 bridesmaids around her like a windbreak. Glenn Dowell was on his phone. And my mother's purse was sitting open on the chair she had been in all night, tipped over on its side, gaping. I did not touch it. I want to be very clear about that, because of the way she told it afterward. I stood beside that chair and I looked, the way anybody looks, for about 2 seconds. A church membership card with an expiration date from 2 years ago. A folded payment reminder from a bank, the kind they send when the minimum is due, and I could see the figure on it, $75. And a page torn out of a pocket calendar with 3 dates circled in blue ballpoint, 1 at the start of the month, 2 near the end. I have seen that page 1,000 times in my office. It is a rotation. It is what people build when they are keeping 4 accounts alive by moving the same money in a circle, and my mother had been running one since before I could read. That is what bought my school shoes. That is what bought the trip to Gatlinburg she had wanted for a year. I stood there and I felt something I did not want to feel. And then she was in the doorway. She saw where my eyes were. And she said, quiet and sharp as a paper cut, "Don't you look at my books." She followed me out to the hallway. She did not yell. My mother has never yelled in her life, and if you have somebody like this in your family, you already know that the yelling ones are not the dangerous ones. She negotiated. She was good at it. She stood close and she put her hand on my forearm and she said, "Honey, just this once. The wedding is tomorrow. You can write it off, can't you? Isn't that the whole point of having the business?" I put my fingers on the folded place card in my coat pocket. That was the first time. And standing in a hallway between an ice machine and a restroom door, I said out loud, "For the first time in 12 years, the number in the spreadsheet I do not open. $146,200. She blinked. Since I was 22. That's what I have given this family. I know it to the dollar, Mom, because I am the only person who has ever kept track, and I never sent one of you a bill. And my mother, who is not a monster, who raised 3 kids on a rotation of minimum payments and never let one of us go to school in last year's shoes, said the truest thing she said all night. That's what family does." I looked at her for a while. Then I said the only sentence I have ever said to my mother that I would say again exactly the same way. "A name is not a payment method." She did not understand it. That is the part that has stayed with me. She looked at me like I had spoken a language she used to know and had let go of on purpose. Back in the office, I asked Margot to explain the hold, because I wanted to hear it in her words and not mine. She was patient about it in a brisk way. "When your party sat down, we ran a pre-authorization against the card on file for the estimated total. That's a hold. The money hasn't left the account. Your bank has just agreed it's there." I asked what happens if the hold is never captured. "Then it falls off in a few days, and I have $13,000 of unpaid food and wine, and I have a conversation with an owner I like. Fair. Direct. Not a friend." Then I asked the question that a bookkeeper asks, and it turned out to be the most important question of my life. "What time do you batch?" She looked mildly surprised that I knew the word. 10:41, she said. "It's an odd time. It's whatever minute the terminal was installed, back in '09. Everything from the day goes through at 10:41, and after that, it's a real transaction, and it's out of my hands." I looked at the wall clock above her filing cabinet. 9:49. If you have ever watched a clock make a decision about your life, put the word clock in the comments and I will know exactly what you mean. Subscribe and stay with me for the next part, because those 52 minutes cost me more than the wine did, and not in the way you are expecting. 52 minutes. That is what I had before the number on that screen stopped being a hold and started being money. I asked Margot for 5 minutes and I went out to the little hallway by the restrooms, because that is the only place in that building with any signal. I took out the business visa. I keep it in the back sleeve of my wallet where I have to work to get it out, which is a system I set up on purpose years ago, and which had protected me from absolutely nothing. I turned it over and called the number on the back, touched the folded place card in my pocket while it rang. That was the second time. A young man with a Midwestern voice answered, and I told him what I needed, and he asked me the question I already knew was coming, in the calm, scripted way they ask it. "Ma'am, do you want to report the card compromised? I want to make sure you understand that closes this number permanently. It can't be reopened. We'd issue a new card in 7 to 10 business days." 7 to 10 business days. The renewal ran Monday at 6 in the morning. The 15th was 6 days out. 41 returns. Nadine. A wire transfer that would have to be typed by hand by a 52-year-old woman who does not like wire transfers. I stood in that hallway with a hand dryer roaring on the other side of the wall, and I said, "Yes. Freeze it. I need to be honest with you about something. I did not do that to my mother. I did that to myself." My mother was simply standing inside the blast radius, and I knew she was there, and I did it anyway. And downstairs in the cellar room, not one person had any idea that the card in that machine had just died. My mother, meanwhile, had decided to end the evening on a high note. She had gone to Peter and told him to go ahead and run the card on file so everybody could have one more toast and get out the door before 11. She was not being sneaky about it. In her mind, the argument in the hallway had been a difficult moment with a daughter who would come around, the way I always came around, and she was closing the loop the way she had closed 1,000 loops. Nobody had told Peter anything, because nobody had told the floor staff anything. He took the terminal to the service station and ran it. The machine printed. He read it and ran it again, because that is protocol, and the machine printed the same thing. Declined, card reported. He walked down the long side of the table with that little curl of thermal paper in his hand, and he was already changing his face on the way, and my Aunt Lorna, who assumes every piece of paper in a restaurant is a bill and every bill is a topic, reached out and took it from him and read it out loud. Card reported? What does card reported mean? Nobody answered her. My mother said, "Run it again." Peter said very gently that he had already run it twice. Somebody's chair scraped. Glenn Dowell stood up. Trent put his hand on Cassidy's back. And I was standing at the bottom of the stairs with my coat over my arm, and I had not said a single word to a single person in that room since I left it. That is worth sitting with. I did not humiliate anybody. I stopped guaranteeing something, and the truth walked itself out into the middle of that room and stood there under the filament bulbs. My mother turned around and found me in the doorway, and for the first time all night, she looked frightened. Margot walked me back into that office and left the door standing open, because my mother was out in the hall by then, and Margot had clearly decided that whatever happened next was going to happen where the person it concerned could hear it. She put a single sheet of paper on the desk and turned it to face me. 3 questions, printed, with a signature line at the bottom and a place for a date. She talked me through both roads without putting a thumb on either one, which I respect her for more now than I did then. Road 1. You sign at the bottom confirming the card on file was used with your permission. I release the ticket. You give me any form of payment you like. We settle $13,149.75. Everybody goes home. Road 2. You answer these 3 questions honestly and sign, and I void the card. I file an incident report with my ownership group, and we pursue the person who created the booking for the balance. She capped her pen. I'm not going to advise you. I'm telling you I need one of them before we close out at 10:41. And that is when I finally understood the place card in my pocket. I had read it as accountant for 4 hours. A shorthand for what I do, a little rude, nothing worse than rude. It was not accountant. Everything at that table had a card with a name on it, and mine had a function instead. And the function was written the way you write it in a ledger. It was account. I was not a guest with a job. I was the method of payment, and somebody had put it in writing in brown ink and set it on my dinner plate. Word got up the stairs the way it does, and within 4 minutes, there were 6 people in the hallway outside that office trying to buy the night back. My Aunt Lorna went first, because Lorna's answer to any crisis is a plan she thought of in the last 10 seconds. We split it, she said. 22 people, that's 600 apiece. We do it right now on Venmo, boom, done. 3 of those 22 people said out loud in a hallway, in front of each other, that they did not have $600. One of them was a woman in her 60s who had bought a dress for this. Then Glenn Dowell came in with his checkbook already open against his forearm and wrote $7,000 and slid it across the desk. And he did it kindly, and he did it because his son was getting married and he wanted this to be over. I said, "Mr. Dowell, that's a generous thing to do, and I'm not going to take it." He asked me, why not? And I told him the truth, which was the first time all night I had been able to say the actual shape of the problem out loud. Because the reservation is still in my name. If you pay it, you're not paying for the wine. You're paying to leave my name on it. He looked at the check for a second, and then he put the cap back on his pen. Cassidy pushed in behind him. "Willa, please, it's my wedding." And Trent Dowell, who had not said anything to anyone all evening, looked past all of us at my mother and said, "Deb, did you put her name on this?" My mother did not answer him. Everybody in that hallway heard her not answer him. Margot closed the door then, on all of them, and it was just the paper and me. I read the 3 questions twice, the way you read anything you are going to sign. 1. Did you create or authorize the reservation identified above? 2. Did you authorize the storage of the payment card identified above in our reservation system? Those were easy. Those were no and no, and my hand did not shake, writing either of them. 3. Have you at any time permitted this individual to use this payment card? I sat and looked at that line for a long while. Here is what I knew. because knowing things like this is literally my profession. If I wrote never, I had a clean claim. My bank would look at $1,500 charged in June to a business account by a person with no authority, and they would take it off, and I would get my money back inside of 2 billing cycles. But if I wrote the truth was Gatlinburg. The truth was that 2.5 years ago I handed that exact card across a rental desk while my mother stood at my elbow, and then a charge for $312.44 showed up on it 3 weeks later, and I called her. And she said she would square it up, and I let it go because it was March. A bank reads that as a pattern. A bank reads that as a woman who has let this person use her card before and has never once put a stop to it in writing. Honesty was going to cost me $1,500. Lying was free, and the pen was already in my hand. Before I could write anything, the door opened again and my mother came in. She did not look at me. She has a way of solving a room by choosing which person in it is real, and she picked Margot. "This is a family card," she said. "This is a family matter. You people are making something out of nothing." Margot Salas had been in restaurants for 19 years, and I could hear all 19 of them in her voice, which never went up, not one note. "Ma'am, I don't have a category in my system called family card. I have a cardholder and I have an authorized user, and this cardholder tells me she is neither one of those things for this account." My mother said, "You don't know anything about my family." Margot said, "That's right, I don't. What I know is that somebody read that number into a telephone in June without asking the person it belongs to, and in this building there's a word for that, and the word isn't family." And my mother, who does not yell, raised her voice for the first time in my adult memory. "Don't you say it." Margot said it. "Fraud. I want you to notice something, and I have thought about it 100 times since, usually at 2 in the morning. I did not say that word. Not once. Not all night. Not to Bree at the host stand, and not to Margot in her office, and not to Ray in the hallway, and not to my mother's face. I never had to. My mother sat down in the chair against the wall, the way people sit down on a curb, and she stayed there, and she did not get up again. Cassidy came in last. She shut the door behind her and stood with her back against it, 27 years old, mascara gone, holding a veil sample in her fist like a dish towel. "Don't sign it," she said. "Please, please don't sign it." I did not argue with her. I had exactly one question left in me, and it was not about the money. "Cass, when did you find out?" She started crying again, and I waited, because I have learned that if you wait long enough, people tell you the thing. "June," she said. I sat with that. 17 weeks. A bridal shower in August where my mother made a toast about her girls. A dress fitting I paid for. 2 Sunday dinners at the house in Grove City where I sat at that kitchen table and asked how the planning was going, and everybody said fine. "You saw the confirmation on her phone," I said. She nodded. "And you didn't say anything." I didn't want to fight before the wedding. Which is the most honest thing my sister has ever said to me, and also the whole reason any of this was possible. "So for 4 months," I said, "you let me think I was invited." And Cassidy said, "You were invited." And I said, "Cass, there were 22 chairs." She stopped crying. She looked at the floor for a second, and then she looked at the door, and then she left. That was the last piece of it, and I want to be exact about what it took away from me. Up until that moment, I had believed I was standing between my sister and something. After that, there was nobody in that building I was protecting except myself. At 26 minutes past 10, I took the folded place card out of my coat pocket. That was the 3rd time. I opened it flat on the desk beside the paper, brown ink face up, W. Myers, Act. And I used it to hold down the corner of the sheet because the copier fan in that office moved the paper when it cycled. Then I answered the questions. 1. No. 2. No. And 3. In the blank they leave for explanations. In my own handwriting, I wrote the thing that cost me money. Once. March. 2.5 years ago. A cabin rental in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I saw an additional charge of $312.44 afterward, and I did not report it. I read it back. Every word of it was true and every word of it was expensive, and I knew, sitting there with a click pen in my hand, that I had just talked my own bank out of giving me $1,500. Then I signed my name. And this is the part I did not plan, the part I still cannot fully explain, except that I think your hands know things before you do. I opened my wallet and I counted out $163 in cash, $95 for my plate, $68 for the single glass of Barolo I drank at the start of the evening before I understood what I was drinking, which is 1/5 of a $340 bottle, and I did that division in my head twice to be sure I was not shorting anybody. I put the money on the desk beside the folded place card. Margot looked at it, and then at me, and she did not make it a moment, which I was grateful for. She said, "I'll get you a receipt." And I said, "Yes, please. Make it out to Willa Myers." 12 years I thought I was paying to keep my family. I was not. I was paying so that I would never have to find out whether they wanted me, and the bill was always cheaper than the question, right up until the night it was not. She printed it and she handed it to me, and she picked the place card up off the paper and handed me that too. I put my coat on. I went up 39 stairs for the last time, at 29 minutes past 10, with 12 minutes to spare, and halfway up I put my hand in my pocket and found the card there and held onto it the rest of the way. That was the fourth time, and it was the only one of the four that did not hurt. 10:41 came and went while I was sitting in my car in a parking garage on Belafonte, with my hands on the wheel. Nothing happened. No alert, no phone call, no sound at all. That is what winning looked like. A number that did not move at a minute nobody else in the world was watching. Out front, under the valet awning, my mother was already telling Lorna the finished version. The restaurant made a mistake. There was a computer problem. They tried to charge the wrong party and Willa got upset. It was fully assembled inside of 30 minutes, and it has not changed since, and I have come to understand that this is a skill and that she has always had it. Trent walked my sister to his truck with his arm around her. Ray stood under the awning by himself, coat still zipped, not following anybody, and when I drove past he lifted 2 fingers off his hip at me, which is the most he has ever said. The barn in Delaware County wanted its balance in full by 10 o'clock Saturday morning, 4 hours before the ceremony. My mother had planned to put it on the same card. The card was dead. Nobody in that family had $4,000 sitting anywhere, and the barn released the date at 11. There was no wedding that Saturday. On Monday morning at 7, Nadine Brody sat at her desk in Hilliard and typed a wire transfer for $6,840, by hand, twice, because she voided the first one over a digit she did not like. The platform came up. All 41 returns went out before the 15th. Nadine's quarterly bonus did not happen. I told her why in person, standing in the doorway of her office, and I did not soften any part of it. 9 months later, here is where everything sits. My mother signed a restitution agreement with Halversons for $14,649.75 at $250 a month, 59 payments. Nobody was arrested. Nobody went to court. Restaurants want money, not verdicts. Ray took his pension 14 months earlier than he planned so they could make the payment, and he has not left her, and I do not expect him to. My bank denied my dispute on the $1,500. They cited prior authorization, exactly as I knew they would, because I had written it down myself in a manager's office in my own handwriting. That is what the truth cost, in dollars, and I have the letter in a drawer. At the church in Grove City, the story is that I called the police over some bottles of wine. Lorna did not invite me to Thanksgiving. She will not invite me this year either. The big thing I stood up to did not fall over. It just found somewhere else to stand. But Cassidy got married in April, in Ray's backyard. 31 people. Everybody brought a dish, and she paid for all of it herself out of an account she opened in February. In June, she called me and asked how to set up a separate account in her own name, one where she is the primary and not the second signer, and I walked her through it on the phone for 40 minutes on a Tuesday. No woman in my family has ever asked anyone that question before. And when she asked me 2 weeks later if I could help with a crib, I did not say no. I said, "Send me the number and I'll tell you what I can do." I keep that little folded place card pinned to the wall above my desk, blank side out, with my own name written across it in pencil, because the most expensive thing I ever bought was not a bill I refused to pay, it was the right to be asked first. That is my story. 22 chairs, one extra, and a receipt made out in my own name. If this reminded you that somebody might still have your card number saved from a trip you barely remember, go and check tonight, and then say it out loud, once, to the person who has it, that the one time was the only time. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.